One's a bit shy about advocating your own papers, but a paper that really deals with this goes back to 2005 that I did with Michelle Lansdowne. And we were looking for exactly this, the paradigm of indigenous entrepreneurship, if you like, the thing that distinguishes it from mainstream entrepreneurship. And without talking too much about the technicalities of that study, we found, and studies since have continued to reinforce, that there are three main things. If you're going to, first of all, the overriding thing here is context matters. You cannot expect to bring a 5-year-old American textbook or a brand new Danish textbook and drop it down and teach in remote communities in Central Australia or on the tundra for Sami peoples and expect them to learn in the same ways and to get the same results and to build businesses in the same way. That's almost self-evident. But what are the key things then that distinguish indigenous entrepreneurship? There are three basic fundamentals that we've found. And the first of them is that, if you like, heritage matters. No matter how urban you may have become, living in central Sydney, etc., that spirit of community, that connection to your family and the ancient of days and the tribes is something that filters in every aspect of your life, including your business life, in a way that it doesn't to the same extent in Western democracies. Not saying that family is not important to people in the mainstream, but it's not as absolutely quintessential, and you cannot even do the business without that. So heritage matters, and I call that the Heritage Positioning Index. So for every indigenous business, you have to position it as to how much that heritage matters. So if we're talking about demarketing Aboriginal sacred art, you know, using the internet to only let things out, that's a high heritage positioning kind of index for that business. If we're talking about somebody starting a delicatessen or another shop who just happens to be an Aboriginal person, they'd be, the relative importance of that in the business would be obviously less, but it's always there. So heritage matters. The second one is what I would call the, it has to do with uniqueness or autonomy. Is this simply a business only for Indigenous people by Indigenous people, which might happen if it's a shop in a remote community? Or to what extent do you partner with the mainstream in doing it? So this notion of partnership with mainstream businesses is always there, because you often get the challenges of people from communities saying, oh, if you start a business with the white man, you're selling out, you're doing all of these sorts of things. So a really good example of that in some other studies we've done is an enterprise in northern Saskatchewan in Canada, and it's called Kitsaki Partnerships. And they have every form of business, from farming wild rice, which is really very traditional, through to owning the biggest golf course in Saskatchewan and running that in partnership with white people, and indeed the biggest trucking company. So that issue doesn't arise in the mainstream so much as you can get into the area of strategic alliances, etc. But there is always an issue of the degree of involvement with the mainstream community that distinguishes an Indigenous from a normal business. And the final one, and perhaps the most important, is what I call the twin skills inventory. If you want to do business and create a venture or do any entrepreneurial activity as an Indigenous person, or you want to help them, as I do as an advisor and that kind, you have to have two skills, one of which you don't have to have in the mainstream. And that is, you have to be just as good or even better at the business skills, because you've got the odds stacked against you through relative deprivation and all of these sorts of things. So you have to be just as good an entrepreneur, just as good an accountant, just as good at finance, just as good at marketing, or better. But you also have to have a range of those heritage skills and an understanding and an empathy for community and all the unwritten laws that are not the laws of the mainstream land, but which could absolutely wreck your business. Because if those family members deem that you are doing something that's socially unacceptable, they will destroy the business for you. They will make your life not worth living in various ways. Or if you are locked into a system where you have to give money to somebody because of a tribal commitment, it makes it 10 times harder to do things like have good retained earnings, etc. in the venture. So you have to have two lots of skills all the time. The business skills that we all have, and you have to have the cultural and community skills that are particular to Indigenous. So those three things, that's the difference.